When the Anglo-Saxons invaded England in the 5th century, 4 major kingdoms would rise from the ashes. These were Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, and East Anglia. The Anglo-Saxons, who were originally pagans, would mostly convert to Christianity, with the pagan kings often converting for political reasons, such as the imposition by a more powerful king, to gain legitimacy, or the Christian promise of gaining immortality upon one's death. One man who resisted, however, was Penda, the King of Mercia, described as the last great pagan warrior king among the Anglo-Saxons, and a most warlike man of the royal race of the Mercians. His destruction sounded the death of English paganism as a political and religious ideology, and thus all of England's kingdoms would fall under the spell of Christianity, with their original pagan traditions, customs, and way of life fading from living memory. This is the tale of Penda, the killer of kings, a man whose will was forged in war, and who was unbending till the end, being the last Anglo-Saxon king to die a pagan. It was he who forged Mercia into a mighty kingdom, and it was he who allowed Mercia to become a dominant kingdom, which would go on to define England's political landscape for centuries to come. This is his story. Penda is first mentioned in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle in the year 626, in which it states, "This year, Penda succeeded to the kingdom of Mercia, and reigned 30 years. Penda was the son of Pibba, Pibba of Creoda, Creoda of Sinwald, Sinwald of Cneba, Cneba of Isel, Isel of Eomer, Eomer of Anglithau, Anglithau of Offa, Offa of Wermund, Wermund of Whittleseg, and Whittleseg of Woden." In the days of old, when the Anglo-Saxon kings ruled, they were often linked to the divine through personal kinship with the god Woden, also known as the Allfather. Old English royal genealogies record Woden as the ancestor of all the kings of the English royal lines. These kings would retain their status through being direct descendants of Woden, their most revered and worshipped god. Penda belonged to the House of Isel, who were a dynasty of Mercian kings during the 7th and 8th centuries. They were named after King Isel, a legendary figure of the migration period, who established the Kingdom of Mercia and was its first king. The Historia Britonum, meaning the history of the Britons, records that Penda's father Pibba had 12 sons, including Penda. It is unknown if Penda was the eldest. However, kinslaying for the throne was common during the Anglo-Saxon age, as it wasn't always the eldest who would take power, but the man with the means to take the throne, often through military might, or who was the greatest warrior and political player. Most of Penda's early life remains a mystery, as he is first mentioned in the sources once he became the King of Mercia. Thus, how he became king and his upbringing is unknown. However, he would have had the typical upbringing of Anglo-Saxon royalty, learning to fight with the sword, spear, and axe. He also would have been immersed in the beliefs and customs of Anglo-Saxon paganism, which included honouring the gods and performing rituals. Very few records of Penda's reign have survived the passage of time. The most significant source we have is Bede's History of the English People, written relatively close to Penda's own lifetime, though fragments of information can also be found in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and the Historia Britonum. Many of these were composed centuries after Penda's death, casting a long shadow of uncertainty over their reliability. Among these, Bede's account remains the most detailed, and perhaps the most influential. It is within these pages that Penda's legacy begins to take shape, though often cast in the role of the villain, standing defiantly on what history came to regard as the wrong side of faith and fate. However, as we know, the victor writes the histories, and as Christianity triumphed over paganism, one can only assume that Penda was a hero among the defenders of the old beliefs. Edwin was the king of Deira and Bernicia, which together would later be known as the Kingdom of Northumbria. In around the year 624, Edwin became the most powerful ruler in Britain. Bede includes him in his list of kings who exercised imperium over the other Anglo-Saxon monarchs. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle gives him the title Bretwalda, or ruler of Britain. In the year 627, Edwin was baptized, and like many Christians, he sought to convert as many people in his kingdom as possible. As Bretwalda and the most powerful man in Britain, Christianity would spread like wildfire. At the time, Mercia was not yet counted among the most powerful of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. It was a realm still in the midst of expansion, striving to solidify its borders and assert its authority, while many of its territories remained the subject of fierce contest with rival kingdoms. By the time Penda rose to power, nearly all neighbouring realms had either embraced Christianity or were well on their way to conversion. In this changing landscape, Mercia stood alone, a resolute stronghold of the old gods, a realm of heathenism in a sea of emerging Christian faith. Penda viewed Edwin's growing power with concern, so he would ally himself with the King of Gwynedd, a powerful Welsh kingdom, in order to challenge Edwin. This would result in the Battle of Hatfield Chase. According to Bede, this is what transpired during the battle. Edwin ruled gloriously for 17 years over the English and British peoples, 6 of which, as mentioned earlier, he spent as a Christian. During his reign, Cadwalla, the king of the Britons, rose in rebellion against him, with the support of Penda, a fierce warrior of royal Mercian blood. A great battle took place on the plain known as Heathfield. There, on October the 12th, in the year 633 AD, Edwin was killed at the age of 47, and his army was either slain or scattered. In the same battle, his son Osfrid, a brave young man, also fell. Another son, Eanfrid, was forced by circumstances to seek refuge with King Penda, but was later killed by him during Oswald's reign, in betrayal of an oath. This marked a time of terrible slaughter for the church and the people of Northumbria. Penda, along with the entire Mercian people, remained idol worshippers and strangers to the Christian faith. Thus, Penda won a great victory as he brought King Edwin's head to York as a trophy. The mighty Bretwalda was dead, and his Christian ideologies for a time were held at bay, as his successors reverted to paganism. Ecgric and Sigebert were the joint kings of East Anglia during that time, and had converted to Christianity following the Hiberno-Scottish mission, which was a series of expeditions in the 6th and 7th centuries by Gaelic missionaries originating from Ireland that spread Celtic Christianity in Scotland, Wales, England and France. Aidan of Lindisfarne established a Bible school in the year 633 at the island of Lindisfarne, and from Northumbria, Aidan's mission spread throughout the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and similar Bible schools were established in Bernicia, Deira, Mercia, and East Anglia. It is estimated that 2/3 of the Anglo-Saxon population were converted to Celtic Christianity at this time. However, Penda saw an opportunity to attack the land of East Anglia in the year 636. The East Anglian soldiers, knowing the battle-hardened Mercians would be valiant warriors, urged Sigebert to lead them in battle. However, King Sigebert refused. According to Bede, his own warriors seized him and threw him out of the monastery. They then carried him into the ranks of the army, hoping that the soldiers would be less disposed to flee in the presence of him, as he had once been a notable and brave commander. But he, still keeping in mind his profession, whilst in the midst of a royal army, would carry nothing in his hand but a wand, and was killed by King Ecgric, and the pagans pressing on all their army was either slaughtered or dispersed. Thus, Penda had just slain 2 more Christian kings, and his power was now being consolidated. To the north and to the east, Northumbria and East Anglia had tasted his wrath, and no Christian army could overcome him in battle, and Mercia was quickly becoming the most dominant kingdom in England. Although Penda himself was a staunch pagan, he allowed his son Prince Paeda to convert and become a Christian. Bede elaborates on the account. At this time, the Middle Angles under Prince Paeda, the son of King Penda, received the faith and sacraments of the truth. Being an excellent youth, he was by his father elevated to the throne of that nation, and came to Oswy, king of the Northumbrians, requesting to have his daughter Elfrida given to him to wife, but could not abstain his desires unless he would embrace the faith of Christ and be baptized with the nation which he governed. When he heard the preaching of truth, the promise of the heavenly kingdom, and the hope of resurrection and future immortality, he declared that he would willingly become a Christian. Nor did King Penda obstruct the preaching of the word among his people. This portrays Penda as a tolerant king, although the old faith, customs and traditions were slowly fading into memory, seemingly from foreign missionaries. As a descendant of Woden, a king was believed to inherit divine wisdom and supernatural strength. Yet noble blood alone was not enough to claim a crown. Lineage from the gods did not guarantee divine favour. Such favour had to be proven. Before ascending to the throne, a man had to demonstrate that he truly possessed the sacred power and insight worthy of kingship, often through victories in battle, or through extraordinary gifts such as prophecy or healing. In the case of Penda, his many triumphs in war would have served as undeniable proof to his people that he was indeed a true son of Woden, an earthly vessel of the war god's might and fury. Though it is certain that Penda adhered to the old pagan faith, the extent of his personal devotion remains unclear. It has been suggested that his resistance to Christianity may have stemmed from not ignorance or stubbornness, but from a belief that Christ was not a fitting patron for a warrior king. Penda's repeated victories over Christian monarchs likely reinforced this view. Among the Anglo-Saxons, divine favour was believed to manifest in earthly power, and the rise and fall of a king reflected the strength of the god he served. Choosing a faith was, in effect, choosing an ally in the eternal struggle for power, and in Penda's eyes, Christ was simply not the strongest ally. His ancestor Woden was. His victories may have led him to believe that he was a warrior king protected by the gods, and that his pagan gods were more effective in war than the Christian god. Following the demise of King Edwin of Northumbria, his nephew Oswald ascended to the throne. Oswald had vanquished Cadwallon, the king of the Britons, who had aligned himself with Penda at the Battle of Hatfield. In the year 634, Oswald subsequently re-established Northumbrian dominance over much of Britain. However, Penda remained hostile to Northumbrian power, or at least was perceived as a threat by Oswald. The precise cause of the war that culminated in the Battle of Maserfield remains unknown. The historian Bede, writing in the following century, portrayed Oswald as a saintly figure, and his desire to present Oswald in a favourable light may have led him to overlook Oswald's aggressive military campaigns. Penda once again allied himself with the Welsh, commanding an army of roughly 3,200 soldiers, while Oswald's forces numbered only 1,000 men. The Battle of Maserfield resulted in a decisive defeat for the Northumbrians. Bede recounts the tale of Oswald praying for the souls of his soldiers as he faced imminent death. Oswald's body was dismembered, with his head and arms displayed on poles. The remnants were later retrieved by his brother and successor Oswiu. As Penda was a pagan and Oswald was a Christian, the latter was subsequently venerated as a martyr and saint. Bede documents numerous miracles attributed to Oswald's bones and the site of his death. In the 12th century, Henry of Huntingdon wrote of the battle. It is said the plain of Maserfield was white with the bones of the saints. The Historia Brittonum attributes Penda's victory to a diabolical agency, but the characterization of the battle as a clash between Christians and pagans may be oversimplified, given that there were likely Christian Welsh fighting on Penda's side. The 20th century historian D.P. Kirby noted that the battle left Penda as without question the most powerful Mercian ruler so far to have emerged in the Midlands, for Oswald was the Bretwalda, being recognised as the most powerful man in England before his demise at the hands of Penda. According to Frank Stenton, an English historian of Anglo-Saxon England, the Battle of Maserfield elevated Penda to the status of the most formidable king in England. With the spread of Christianity among the Anglo-Saxon kings, it seems that Penda's ancestral deity Woden was challenging Christ for dominion over England. In the year 645, the throne of Wessex was held by Cenwell, one of the last pagan kings in Anglo-Saxon England. He had been married to the sister of Penda, the powerful King of Mercia. However, when Cenwell chose to repudiate Penda's sister in favour for another wife, the slight did not go unanswered. Enraged, Penda marched against Wessex, driving Cenwell into exile in East Anglia. Who ruled Wessex during Cenwell's years in exile remains uncertain, though it's widely believed that Penda may have exercised control, despite the absence of surviving records to confirm it. At that time, King Anna ruled East Anglia, a pious and cultured sovereign who enriched the monastery at Knobbersburg with splendid buildings and treasures. He would go on to found a monastery there, further establishing his devotion to the Christian faith. Yet in the year 651, Penda once again brought war upon East Anglia, attacking the monastery itself. Anna and his men rushed to its defence, holding off the Mercians just long enough for the monks to flee with their sacred books and relics. Though the monastery was spared, Anna was not victorious. Defeated in battle, he was forced into exile. Anna returned to reclaim his kingdom in the year 654, but word of his return reached Penda, who once again led a mighty Mercian host into East Anglia. A second and more devastating assault followed. The armies of Penda and Anna met in battle, and the East Anglians were defeated. Many fell that day, including King Anna himself and his son Jurmin. In the aftermath of this bloody victory, Penda appointed his own son Peada as the ruler of Middle Anglia, further expanding Mercian dominance over the Anglo-Saxon realms. With the south and east subdued, Penda turned his gaze northward once more, unleashing war upon Oswiu of Bernicia in his own territory. According to the historian Bede, Penda cruelly ravaged the land of the Northumbrians far and wide, laying waste to the countryside and besieging the royal stronghold of Bamborough. When the Mercians failed to take the fortress by force or siege, they attempted to burn it to the ground, but Bede recounts that a divine wind summoned by the prayers of Saint Aidan miraculously turned the flames back upon the attackers. Aidan is said to have cried, "Behold, Lord, what mischief Penda does," and the heavens answered. Years later, after Aidan's death, Penda returned to the region and again led a brutal campaign. He laid waste to the land with fire and sword, even burning the very church where Aidan had died. Yet, as Bede writes, The wooden post against which the saint had leaned in his final moments remained miraculously untouched by the flames. This was believed to be a sign of divine intervention. No open battles are recorded between Penda and Oswiu during this time, suggesting that Oswiu may have avoided direct conflict, perhaps recognizing that he could not yet match the might of the Mercian king. Over the years, King Penda had carved out a legacy of dominance through a series of resounding military victories. Chief among them, his triumphs over the once mighty Northumbrians. Yet again, the aging warlord would march northward, his sights set on overthrowing Oswiu, the king of Bernicia. The precise cause of this final campaign remains uncertain, though Bede tells us that Penda had shown tolerance for Christian preaching within Mercia. It has been suggested that he viewed the spread of Bernician-backed Christianity into Mercia and Middle Anglia as a form of spiritual colonization, an encroachment that threatened his own sovereignty. Others have speculated that Penda sought to prevent Oswiu from reuniting Northumbria, wary that he might restore the kingdom's former glory, once embodied by Edwin and Oswald. To prepare for the coming storm, Penda rallied his allies from East Anglia and Wales, assembling a formidable host led by 30 warlords. Oswiu, brother to the slain Oswald, ruled only the northern portion of Northumbria, Bernicia, and soon found himself under siege in a now lost stronghold somewhere in the northern wilds. According to the Historia Brittonum, Oswiu, desperate to save his kingdom, offered treasure in exchange for peace. Penda is said to have accepted it, distributing the wealth among his British allies. Yet Bede offers a starkly different account, claiming that Penda refused the offer outright, vowing instead to utterly destroy the entire race of Oswiu, sparing neither high nor low. Compounding Oswiu's vulnerability, his own son Ecgfrith was at the time held as a hostage within Mercia, giving Penda yet another advantage. For reasons that remain unclear, perhaps the result of political manoeuvring or omens ill-interpreted, Penda's army turned southward, perhaps intending to return home, but desertions began to sap the strength of the Mercian alliance. Cadafel of Gwynedd fled under the cover of night with his men, earning the scornful name Battle Shirker. Ethelwald of Deira likewise withdrew, choosing to await the outcome from a place of safety. Only King Ethelhere of the East Angles remained loyal, standing beside Penda on the eve of battle. Oswiu, still vastly outnumbered, gave battle to Penda. Bede recounts the tale. Oswiu, with a mere handful of warriors, stood against the enemy, said to be 3 times his size, 30 legions, led by renowned commanders. Oswiu and his son Alfrith fought with desperate courage. The pagans were routed, their 30 captains and countless soldiers fled or were cut down. Among the fallen was Ethelhere of East Anglia, brother to the slain King Anna, whose involvement in the war had drawn his kingdom into destruction. The battle was fought near the river Winwade, swollen beyond its banks by heavy rains. As the Mercians fled, many were not slain by sword, but drowned in the floodwaters. Nature, it seemed, had turned against them. Penda himself lay among the fallen, and thus his reign ended. The last great pagan warlord of England. With his fall, the old gods faded, and the tide of Christianity swept ever more firmly across the land. Penda was the last great pagan warrior king among the Anglo-Saxons, his warrior status unquestionable. The historian Frank Stenton wrote this of Penda: "He was himself a great fighting king of the most honoured in the Germanic saga, the lord of many princes, and the leader of a vast retinue attracted to his service by his success and generosity. Many stories must have been told about his dealings with other kings, but none of them have survived. His wars can only be described from the standpoint of his enemies. What kind of a man must he have been, when so many of the kings he vanquished were later raised to sainthood? Edwin of Northumbria, whom Penda struck down at Hatfield Chase, was later venerated as a saint. Oswald of Bernicia, who Penda defeated and slew at Maserfield, likewise became a martyr and was sainted. Even Prince Jermyn, the young son of King Anna of East Anglia, himself slain by Penda, later rose to saintly status. Those who perished by Penda's sword were transformed into saints, their deaths woven into hallowed legends, adorned with miracles whispered through the generations. Yet, while their stories grew in glory, what of the tale of the lone pagan king who defied the rising tide of Christendom? What of the man who vanquished not one, but two kings hailed as Bretwaldas, the so-called overlords of Britain? Had the chroniclers not been so steeped in Christian zeal, had they not cast Penda in the shadows of their theology, perhaps he too would have been called Bretwalda, for in power and influence, he was equal to any who bore the title. His legacy, obscured by the disdain of Christian scribes, might have stood beside the great names of early England, not as a villain or outcast, but as the King of Kings. When Penda fell in battle, he died the death he had lived for, the death of a warrior. Yet with his fall, the flame of paganism in England flickered and faded. His sons, perhaps wary of endless conflict, or perhaps seduced by the unifying power of the Church, embraced Christianity, and with that, the old gods of the Angles and Saxons were silenced. But there is one thing the chroniclers could not take from him, one truth that endures beyond the dogma and the disdain, and that was that Penda was a fierce warrior, unyielding and unbending, and in that, he became a legend. I would like to give a huge thank you to all of my members. Your contribution is valuable to the continuation of the channel, and I appreciate you all immensely. A special thank you to John Sites. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you all next week for another History Profile.